The Rambam, in the laws of the fundamentals of Torah, writes that there's a mitzvah to love Hashem, to love God, as it says in the first paragraph of the Shema. You should love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your possessions. Positive commandment. So Rambam asks, regarding anything in the Torah, observing the Shabbos, eating kosher, giving charity, as much as you don't want to do it, a person could force himself to give charity, to observe Shabbos, to eat kosher. But something which is dependent on an emotion like love or reverence, if one doesn't love, how does one bring himself to love? It's like I always say, a man is introduced to a woman for marriage, and the woman has every quality, and there's every reason to marry her. But they meet, they discuss, he's impressed. So the one who introduced says, "Are you ready to get married?" He says, "No. Not only am I not great, I have no interest in marrying her." So they say, "Why not?" Who could not want to marry such a woman? He says, "Because I have to have a feeling of love towards her. And therefore, if I don't love her, I'm not marrying her." How is it possible the Torah should dictate to us? It's incumbent on every Jew, he must love God. Person says, "I'll do everything perfectly, but I don't love him." So evidently there is a way and there's a path to follow, which will bring a person that he will be touched emotionally to love and to revere. What exactly is that path? So Rambam writes that a person, where God created a human being, that if a person appreciates another individual or an entity to be special and advantageous to him and exceptional, the person naturally will gravitate to that and want to be associated with it. And the person will have a positive feeling towards that. That's the nature of every human being. We all want to be associated with special people if they're truly special. Each person has his own understanding of what special is. Some people want to be associated with wealthy people. Some people want to be associated with people who have power. Some people want to be associated with people who have an understanding of values. They're special. And the more special you see that person, the more you're attracted to them. You know, there's a rule of thumb. When you meet a person and you're impressed, if the person is truly special, the more you get to know the person, the more special it becomes. But on the other hand, if the person is not special, you may have initially been impressed because of the way you understood what that person was. But when you get to know him, you begin seeing all the cracks and all the warts and all the shortcomings of the person. And you become ultimately made even disillusioned with that person. But the person who's truly special, the more you see him and interact and observe, the more you're taken aback, overly impressed. You've never met such a person in your life. And eventually, you adore him. You revere him. You want to be associated with him because of the value of what that person is, what you're able to cull from him. And that creates that attachment, which is called love. We read in Pirkei Avos, there are two types of love. There's love, which is contingent on something, and there's love, which is called selfless love. So what is love, which in the words of the Mishnah, Avat tluya b'davar. Love which is contingent on something. There was a story, King David had two children. One was a son, one was a daughter. The daughter was biologically a daughter, but it was not his child, halachically. Why? Because the Torah tells us that when we go to battle and a person sees a woman on the battlefield in battle during this time, if he's attracted to her, he's prohibited to cohabit with her even before she converts. So there was a princess. David went to battle, and there was a princess. And he engaged with her sexually, cohabited, and she conceived. Ultimately, she converted. She became his wife. She was a Jewess, but at the time of conception, she wasn't Jewish. So the child that was born from this woman in his palace was biologically his child, but halachically was not his child. Her name was Tamar. Tamar. He had a son by the name of Amnon. Amnon was his halachic son. Not only his biological son, the mother was Jewish. When he was conceived, it's a son. These two siblings, biological siblings, fell in love. And Amnon wanted to marry Tamar. She was beautiful. He was attracted to her. So Tamar says to her brother, I'm happy to marry you. Halachically, we're permitted to marry. Because we're not really halachically related, although we share the same father. But I will not marry you without our father's permission. If our father gives permission, I'm happy to marry you. But otherwise, I'm not marrying you under any circumstance. He had an irresistible desire for her. So he had a friend who was an evil man. And the evil man became aware of the problem. So he goes and he advises his friend with very bad advice. And he says to Amnon, because he's so close with your sister, and she'll do anything for you up to the point of marriage, what you do is feign that you're sick and you're not well, and you want her to come and take care of you in your sick bed. And when she's in seclusion with you, force yourself upon her, and you rape her. Once you engage in that kind of relationship, she'll be able to marry you, even without the consent of your father. That's bad advice he gave him. What happened? He did that. It backfired. It was disastrous. It's disastrous to the point where, because she had no interest in him any longer, and under no circumstance, and there was a consequence, he hated her. Here there was an irresistible love, and now because marriage was not a consideration, he despised her. But you loved the woman irresistibly. He only loved her because he was attracted to her beauty, and he desired her physically. But no moment that was no longer an option. There's nothing special about you. And not only that, since there was a consequence, you're the basis for my problem. And he despised her. That's avat tluya b'davar. The love initially was contingent on his physical attraction. Now, to bring it out clearly, over 50 years ago, there was a person, first time he visited the United States, he was known as the Magid of Yerushalayim. He was a very great tzaddik. His name was Rav Shalom Shvadron. He was the brother-in-law of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And he spoke. I heard him speak in Baltimore, in the yeshiva. And as I always said, he could have outdone Zero Mostel 1,000 times over in the Jewish theater. He knew exactly, he could bring the crowd to the floor laughing. And the next moment, he was able to bring them to tears. He knew exactly, and he acted out many things to deliver messages. So he acted out the story. This person goes into an exclusive restaurant, and he spoke, although he spoke Yiddish, but he said this in Hebrew. And he goes into this very exclusive restaurant, and the patron looks at the menu, and we're talking about a 5-star menu, very expensive menu. And he orders the best main course on the menu. What is it? It's a platter of fish, very expensive fish, which are garnished in a certain way. And so the waiter asks him, why did you order such an expensive platter of fish? So he says to the waiter, because I love fish. I love fish, okay? He brings him this most beautiful garnished platter of fish, which you can take a photograph of it before he mutilates it. And the moment he puts it down on the table, takes his cutlery, he starts mutilating, decimating the fish. Within 2 minutes, the platter wasn't so attractive any longer. So the waiter says to the patron, I beg your pardon, could I ask you a question? You ordered the most expensive platter of fish, which is garnished so beautifully. Of course, he said, you love fish. I said, if somebody loves something, do you mutilate it? Do you destroy it? Just look what you did to this platter. So the waiter says, what you should have said to me, it's not you love fish. You love yourself and you love to eat fish. You don't love the fish. It's not the fish you love yourself. And through the fish, you're able to accommodate your own, satisfy your desire. That's called love, which is contingent on something. Amnon, his attraction to his sister was a beauty, and because she was agreeable to marry him, to satisfy all his needs and all his wants. The moment that fell to the wayside, and it became disastrous, not only did he not love her, he despised her. That's ava atluyi b'davar. That's love which is contingent on something. What's ava she'eino tluyi b'davar? Love which is not contingent on anything. That was the love between David and Yonasan. Yonasan was the son of King Saul, and they were best friends, and they loved one another. We're not talking about chas v'shalom, God forbid, physical love. Meaning what David saw in Yonasan, that he was one of the most special human beings who walked the face of the earth. And Yonasan saw in David the same thing. So what was the love based upon? Not what each one could do for the other, but rather recognizing how special that person was. And because they recognized each one's unique ability, capacity, potential, that they're one of a kind of people, therefore they were attracted to one another. Because each one recognized each one to be of this exceptional quality at every level. So it's not because what you could do for me, what I could do for you. Because I recognize who you are and what you are. That's ava she'eino tluyi b'davar. That love is not contingent on anything other than recognizing who you are. It's not because I'm a beneficiary, because you're going to give me something. But I want to be associated with someone who's special. The two types of marriages. Man is attracted to a woman because of her beauty. She comes from a wealthy family. That's attraction. That's the attraction. But he doesn't see her as being anything special and unique. So it's the beauty and the money. What happens? She gets older. He doesn't see her beautiful any longer. What happens if the father-in-law, somehow he had reversals and he's not able to live the lifestyle which he thought he'd be able to live? And he's not attracted to his wife any longer. You understand? That marriage is going to turn into something for him, which is angst, agony, and something he wants to run away from. Because he never saw the woman who she was for who she was. It was the trappings. So once the trappings fall away, he loses interest. But if a person marries a woman because he meets her and he's taken by her because how special she is, her qualities, her ethics, her morals, her quality of person, her sensitivities, and that person who appreciates that, he is of the same ilk. He has those same values. This is like what they call a marriage made in heaven. The two people should meet, and one appreciates the other one for what they are. So regardless of the material or the beauty, the external beauty, that's secondary. The person is the essence of what you are. That's avosh edatlu bedover. I married her for who she is, not for what she has. So what is the basis for the attraction? What is the basis for the love? Because you're unique. I want to have that kind of wife. I want to be associated with that kind of person. Lahavdil. If a person would appreciate and understand who God was, God is the creator. God created this universe. God created things that we can't even fathom that even exist. It's beyond the scope of any creation, even beyond the scope of an angel, because the greatest angel is finite. God is infinite. God's creativity, what God brought about, I'll give you an example. A person has an appreciation for art, and he sees a Rembrandt, and he sees a Picasso, sees the masters, and a person says to him, I see you're a connoisseur, an art connoisseur. You understand it, you appreciate it. He says, of course. I'm taken by the genius. I've seen many masters, but they surpass all of them. One of a kind. So a person says to him, if I'd be able to take a time machine and bring you into the past and bring Rembrandt and Picasso to meet you, would you want to meet him? He says, of course. To meet such a genius who could create such a masterpiece of genius will be the dream of my life. Well, what's the value of meeting him? These two people, why do you want to meet them? Because since you have an appreciation for their genius in terms of what they were able to create on canvas, I want to be associated. I'd like to meet that kind of person. But you can't be in any way, you can't apprentice under them. Doesn't make a difference. But I have an appreciation for their genius. I would like to meet that kind of person because I understand what they are. God, the creator, where his creativity is not to be understood. The genius, the beauty. I always say, sometimes I see a sunset in the summer. Beautiful, breathtaking. And I think to myself, Rembrandt could not replicate that under any circumstance. No human being could replicate that. But yet, not impressed. It's breathtaking, not impressed. You go to a zoo and you go to the bird pavilion and you see exotic birds from South America. When you look at these birds, they almost don't look real. They look like they're made of wax. The plumage, their beaks, the color, the yellows, the orange, the purple, and what they look like. It's just amazing. An entity of beauty. How did this come about? And every bird has its own unique beauty. God created all this. God is the master of masters. So why do we get all excited when we do get involved with God or want to have a relation with God? Why? So Rambam explains, because a person, he doesn't focus on these things. He doesn't reflect on them. But if a person would stop and he would reflect, we're talking about a person who believes in God, he would reflect on the expanse of creation, the heavens, the topography of the earth, what's contained within existence, and you really block out everything else other than that focus, he says you'll be overwhelmed with God's genius. And as a result of that being overwhelmed, you'll be negated. And when you become negated, because you feel you're less than a speck on the spectrum, it will evoke a level of desire and love to be associated with this creator. Those are the words of Rambam. That's how one is able to bring about and evoke love for God. You have to reflect and understand who he is. And when you understand who he is, then you understand who you're not. When you become minimized due to his dimension of being, then you begin appreciating who he is. And the more you appreciate who he is, the more you gravitate and want to be associated with who he is. And that evokes the most intense level of love that you go through thick and thin and make every sacrifice without any holdbacks for him. That's how one comes to love Hashem. And that is the positive commandment. You should love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your possessions. Why? What's the heart? The heart is the emotion. We're talking about this love is not contingent on anything other than the reality of who God is. And when you come to that realization, you give your life and you give everything. You give everything away for that. There's a beautiful word from the Or Chaim HaKodesh. We find at the time of the building of the Mishkan, there were two types of people who contributed to the Mishkan. Now, there were 13 materials that were needed to build the Mishkan. What were some of the materials? Gold, silver, copper. Those were the metals. And others, certain type of wood, dyes, wool, hides, whatever was needed, craftsmanship. So we find whenever the Torah uses the appellation of Ish, the man, Ish is an expression of distinction. You're a person of distinction. So it says in the Torah states, Ish Asher Neso Libo, the man who was inspired by his heart contributed to the building of the Mishkan. And then there was another type of person, Asher Nodvo Libo, the person who gave due to the generosity of his heart. He has a generous heart. What's the difference between a person who's inspired by his heart and a person who has a generous heart? You have people that are generous. I'm just quoting the words of the Or Chaim HaKodesh. Person is generous. A person is generous. He will give due to his generosity up to a point. When does he stop giving? If he feels that going beyond that point will compromise him or infringe on his needs, he stops at that point. He gives generously because he's generous, but it's up to a point. Because I'm generous, I want to help. I want to help you. I want to do for you. But when I want to do for you, there's me and there's you. So when there's me and you, and I want to be generous, as long as there's the me, there's a cutoff point. What about if a person gives because he believes in the objective? I'm inspired by it. When a person gives because his heart is inspired, there is no me. There's only the objective. When a person gives due to the objective, you give even beyond your capacity, because at that moment, you're not that important. All that is important is the objective is addressed. That's Asher Neso Libo. That's the person who's inspired by his heart. That person at that level is identified and classified as Ish. He's a person of distinction because he has such an appreciation for the value of the Mishkan, to create a dwelling location for God's presence, that, and therefore there are no holdbacks. All that matters is we create that location. The other person says, I understand this is important. I'm generous, I'll give generously, but I'm giving, there's the me and there's the project. I will give to a point before it infringes or compromises my financial standing. But on the other hand, the person who's inspired, he's never part of the equation. All that matters is the objective is met. That's the difference between these two individuals. A person who understands who God is, and you strip away the ego, and there's no I, and there's only him, because you recognize his dimension of being, the creator, and you're overwhelmed and you negate it. The more you negate it, the more you see who he is. I'll give you an example. Person has a cataract, and he has a thin cataract. He has a thin cataract membrane that covers the eye. The eye is healthy. Quite a bit of light filters through that thin membrane. It's thicker, less. When it's to a point where it has to be removed, the person can only make out an image, doesn't see clearly. But what happens? The process of regaining full sight, they peel it away layer by layer. As you peel away those layers of membrane, the eye is able to see more and more. And once you peel away that last layer of membrane, all of a sudden you see everything's defined and you see reality. And you're amazed by what you're able to see now compared to what you couldn't see. What is that thick membrane that doesn't allow us to see? It has nothing to do with the intellect. See, I mean, emotionally internalize. It's called ego. It's the I and the me and everything else. The moment you recognize who you're not, all of a sudden you see, and your heart speaks, and your heart absorbs, and you're able to fully grasp, embrace this reality. When you're able to embrace that reality, as much as you have, you don't have enough of it. It's almost magnetic. You're drawn to it. And that's what the Rambam says in terms of Avas Hashem. That's the mitzvah of loving God. The objective is to come to there. Nobody's born loving God, but it's a process. And the more you realize and you reflect on who God is, his majesty, his greatness, his dimension of unlimited, and his creativity, and what he's brought about, there's no way anybody can match God. But we don't think about that. You need to reflect, to meditate, to remove all distractions, to fully be touched by that. And of course, the studies, you spiritualize yourself. Remove yourself from the eye. Less indulgence, more involvement in studying Torah, which is the antidote that gives you that sense, and your spiritual senses start functioning. Okay, let's shift to the Amidah. We're about to have an audience. The Amidah is you have an audience with God. As a Jew, whenever we choose to have an audience with God, God says, you're my children, you're welcome. Just knock on my door and take 3 steps forward and come with a certain mindset. You're welcome to ask anything you want. Before who do we stand? Well, we know you ask any person. It's the audience with God. If you'd have an audience with a mortal king, the greatest king. You ever see people go to a meeting and they're going up in the elevator? So there's the chrome in the elevator and you're able to see reflection. Before they step out of the elevator, they're fixing the tie, straighten out their jacket and make sure the collar is in place. And then they walk out of the elevator. Now they're ready to go to. What are you looking? Of course, you want to look your best when you go for that interview. Or to sell your product, whatever that is. You want to make an impression. It's a mere mortal. And if you don't look perfect, but you realize the client is very valuable, I have to make the best impression. And you think about every detail of what could be said or not said, or what should be said. And it's thought out. And you even rehearsed it. You had a coach teaching you exactly how to make the sale. You have your coach teaching you how to say the Amidah, what you're supposed to think and how you're supposed to articulate those words. Well, I took a crash course in Hebrew, 5 lessons. I can read Hebrew very well with the vowels. It's very phonetic. It's easy to read. Yeah, but that's not what it's about. The Talmud tells us, Rahman al boy. God wants the heart. Everything's the feeling. It's the reality. It's not the words. It's not the form. It's the substance. The substance is the reality of who you are. What is the nature of the relationship? So if a person enters into that audience, and it's an avash tluy b'davar, this is love, not contingent on anything, but rather recognizing who God is. It's not something you're doing, it's something you're experiencing. You become consumed and subsumed by that experience. You talk differently. Your level of humility becomes natural. You become negated. And that's what it is. And if a person is able to achieve that, no question, the first words that come out of your mouth, it'll come out of a different mind, a different motion. It'll be a different expression. Stop here today, to be continued tomorrow, on Sunday.